listening to The Breakup Theory, conversations on ending things and collective liberation. Today I tackle a letter with an old friend, Amar, who some of you may know from his work on the Final Straw Radio. He's one of the reasons I'm making this show. The Final Straw invited me to start recording conversations, and that's how I got here. In past Final Straw episodes, Amar and I have tackled different internal and external struggles, with people addressing conflict or proposing new paths for social relations. I'll link them below. Amar's curiousness and openness has always been personally helpful to me when trying to chew over difficult feelings and ideas. He has a capacious understanding and gives so much grace to the experience of problems we run into while we're trying to do good. Now, this letter has actually been sitting in my inbox for a while, and I feel bad that I let it go for so long. I can make excuses, like last year involving a bunch of personal stuff that took up most of my attention, and then the need to finish my new book, which I'm turning in soon. But I'll also admit that at first, I wasn't sure how to tackle the issues the letter writer raised in a way that honored all of the feelings. There were many factors going on in a time of great crisis, and I wanted to try to hold them all together. I kept batting around ways to approach it until finally I realized Amar would be the perfect person to bring into the conversation, and he was willing to join me. And as you will see, I was not wrong. In our conversation, we tackled the breakup of a long monogamous relationship and the debut of a new polyamorous life, an international romance beset by war and geopolitics, and the sudden letdown of planned encounter canceled at the last minute. There's so many big feelings here that the letter brings up, and each one could be the focus of its own conversation. Bringing them all together surely tangled up the writer, who is trying to sort out a new phase of life and a new way of relating to lovers. I hope the writer is still listening to the podcast and can find some support in our conversation. It's likely that their life has moved on in ways, but perhaps there's some feeling lingering here that can find some reflection in our engagement. But of course, I imagine that our discussion will reach other listeners too. With this letter episode, my wish is to spark some more correspondence. It hasn't been the focus of the most recent shows, but it's one of my favorite things to do, and I know listeners love to hear these discussions, whether they're the one who wrote or not. We're all getting hit hard out there, so please write, tell your friends who are struggling to reach out, send us all the problems and questions that you'd like to hear us think about together. You can leave a message at 917-426-6548 or use the form forum.jotform.com/thebreakuptheory/stories. This is encrypted and anonymous. Or you can find me on Instagram at @thebreakuptheory and DM me with your question. I really love hearing from you. I love learning from you. I love being able to offer whatever I can to think through these problems from the queer, anarchist, nihilist perspectives that I hold, and be in conversation with people like Caroline, who comes from that social work background, or someone like Amar, who has experience and love and sympathy. And I know that other gay anarchists and friends listen to this and love it too. If you like this podcast, please rate it and follow it on the different apps where you listen to it. That helps boost the potential audience. Also, just tell your friends. If you want to access more of my work, as well as the work of the wonderful Carla Joy Bergman, Danny Burleson, and Vicky Osterweil, you can sign up for our newsletter at cawshinythings.com. If you subscribe, you'll also get access to all of our articles, our Discord server where we have discussion, movie nights, writing workshops, and book clubs, and more. Our podcast, advice column, and zine and sticker library are always free. I'm proud of the thing that we're building together, creating a support system for the lonely and often impoverished work of writing, and also finding new ways to engage with people who are committed to collective thinking and writing. We're trying to build an anarchist culture, participate in the culture wars. If you want to reach any of us there, you can email caw.shinythings@proton.me. I'll be hosting the next book club on our Discord server June 3rd at 5 p.m. Eastern on the queer anarcho-nihilist journal Baden, the first issue. A hugely influential text for me. Subscribe and join us. Whether or not you read the book, everyone's welcome. As Amar says at the end of this episode, go find the Final Straw Radio. It's a long-running resource to learn about anarchist actions, struggles, analysis, and ideas. The show's so wide-ranging in its subjects and guests, it'll surely open up your horizons. Plus, they make zines out of the transcripts of different episodes. You can print them out for the event you're tabling at. You can find The Final Straw on any podcast app and select radio stations, but also support them at www.patreon.com/TFSR. There are different tiers of membership that help fund the transcription, for example. You You can get gifts like zines, stickers, and pins, and you can even get your zine sent to an incarcerated comrade. You can find the tremendous back catalog at thefinalstraw.noblogs.org. And if you search, you'll see the episodes I contributed under an old name. But I'm linking here to a conversation we recorded with Vicky about a really interesting essay put up by Your Lazy Comrades in the year following the George Floyd uprising, and then another one we did on misogyny in anti-fascist movements. The Breakup Theory is a member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, which pulls together a wide variety of shows taking an anarchist perspective on culture, politics, actions, and more. Check them out at channelzeronetwork.com. Now let's get into it with Amar. Okay, so after a little bit of a hiatus, we're back with a letter episode from a listener who wrote in. It's been a while since they've written, so I hope that they will still receive this and we'll still give them some help or support, but I think it's also probably pretty relevant to other people. So we're going to go into that, but I want to say I'm here with my friend Amar, who I also used to work with on The Final Straw. So some of you may be familiar with this person's voice and work. And I'll just let you introduce yourself before we get into the letter.
Oh, that sounds good. Hey, Shuli, I'm really excited to be here with you. I really love the breakup theory. I think it's a really lovely addition to sort of the panoply of anarchist voices and anarchist podcasts out there. I use the he, they pronouns. I live in the South of the US. Yeah, I'm a trans person. I'm a person of mixed race. I have some vague familiarities and parallels with the themes that we will talk about in this letter, though not obviously 100%. But yeah, I'm really excited to get into it with you about this on this topic.
Yeah, I thought you were a perfect person just to have on for letters anyway, but I showed you this letter and you felt like it was something you could help me tackle. And it's a complex situation that this person's talking about. So I felt like I needed to give it consideration and have someone to converse with me about it in a way that can honor the
Steve.
complexity of it.
Yeah.
So I will read the letter and then we'll go into it. The person asked to use as little detail as possible, although I think that there's important details here that I will keep in because the dynamics of it are important. So they open the letter saying, "Mine is a multinational story that intersects with the ongoing violence in Palestine and Lebanon, as well as privilege dynamics, polyamory, and two breakups." But to get at all those dynamics, I want to kind of go into what they say. They wrote this to the Breakup Theory podcast before the Iran war broke out, right? This is like after October 7th. So genocide was happening in Gaza and Lebanon was already being targeted as usual by Israel. But it is
Mm,
previous to the current bombardment of Lebanon by Israel. But I still think
yeah,
that's relevant.
I agree.
I'm just gonna kind of summarize it. So the person starts their letter out talking about how in the last 2 years they had sort of shifted in their understanding about relationships. They say radical honesty and compulsory monogamy. They've been in a relationship for 18 years with a monogamous partner and was able to tell this partner that they felt that they needed to engage polyamorous kind of relationships. The partner had been monogamous and they talked about like how they could possibly go through this together. But as it evolved, it became clear that they had different needs. And so they split.
Mm,
The letter writer said that this created some logistical problems just because they were living in a house that was owned by the partner and they're an artist without that kind of stable income. So they're put by this situation into a situation of precarity. But this opened them to living a life of solo poly and making new connections. And this leads to the question, right? That they met someone who is sort of more intense and more important in relation to the other connections they've made, who's another artist working in Beirut. And the writer was in Lebanon. They hit it off there, but then the writer left. And then, after they left, this was when this stuff started happening in the
mhm,
region, right? This is fall 2023. After the parting, they stayed in contact. pretty frequently, it seems. And because of all the difficulties, there was a kind of closeness that I think came between them. And they even led to a declaration of love for each other. I think they importantly note that saying love has a different context and different connections. I think that's really an important and good point to say.
Mm.
And they wanted to like meet up again, but there were all of these life things that came in the way, especially like international travel and funds and all that stuff. But then this person was able to leave Lebanon and go somewhere else. And the writer had also left where they were at in the US, and they had experience of dealing with migration issues and refugee systems. And
It's a little unclear to me whether they themselves also experienced it, but it's very, very clear from the letter that they're like intimately familiar with the sort of the structures that people often have to deal with. So that to me just like indicates a fluency with the situation that perhaps not everybody needs to have.
yeah, and I think it's important because they're not talking simply about like a relationship void of any political context. Like it's set within borders and genocide and war and all of these things, and something that they are aware of and know about. So thanks for emphasizing that.
Mm.
But the thing that there was like kind of novel in this relationship is that because of the closeness that they had created between each other, the person that they were having this relationship with called them as they were leaving and messaged them as soon as they arrived. And that felt, very important. With this kind of move, it seemed like maybe more possible for them to meet in real life. And that came up as a possibility because the writer was traveling near where the other person was living. And so they made plans. The writer even booked a place to stay alone together. And it was like really exciting. But the letter writer is also acknowledging that maybe it would be the last time, right? It might be beautiful. It might be also the time to let go, but it's worth it no matter what, right? It's not
Mm.
that they're going in with any kind of specific expectations about the future. Also, I think is very important, because they said
Mm.
it could be a really beautiful farewell to a lovely connection. But in the process of making plans before the thing happened, the person that they were going to meet said he was feeling anxious and missing family and was feeling guilty, I think, about the letter writer spending money to come there and put them up. And he said he had been seeing someone new that had brought some new feelings, and he
Mm.
didn't want a relationship with that person, but all of it was like chaotic and had negative feelings. And then suddenly, as the letter writer experienced it, he said, "Don't come." So that's the kind of story. And then the letter writer reflects on this in terms of asking a question. Right? They did cancel the visit and understood that this person needed that, but they've had emotional turmoil in terms of moving on from this, and it led them to questions about their own engagement with people. So they asked, "Am I a polyamorous person who flew too close to the emotional sun with a likely monogamous human who again was very understanding of who I am and trying quite palpably to understand what that meant for him? If he might also be poly." So like a repetition again, like, am I poly and someone else like wants a mono relationship, but like wants me, and all that kind of confusion. Or was it just too much to him because he was in the precarious position? And then the writer says that they were frustrated with trying to understand this, feeling the need to understand it, and then give the kind of story a close, finish the narrative, they said. They also said, I think this is important, that even though it was expensive to like plan this trip, they refused to let their scarce resources stand in the way, which I
Yeah.
think is also a powerful, important moment, in kind of giving yourself into a situation. But then worries that that choice and ability to do that might have made things too intense for
Mm.
him. And then the shift between something that seemed like mutual to something that ended or was like given this clear boundary was sudden feeling for them. So they ended up feeling rejected and disposable, but also feel like they were inhabiting a privileged position in relation to someone who's fleeing Lebanon because of the war going on there. And so then they're questioning their own ability or right to feel anything. So it's just a lot of really complicated and confused feelings that just to like boil it down, there's very valid individual feelings about the ways that relationships play out set within a context of like
Mm,
global warfare and genocide and borders and resources. So I think
yeah.
that that kind of adds a layer of complication. And so that's my summary of the letter. I hope that I respected them in terms of like limited details, but also I felt like there was a lot in here that was necessary to understand the nuances of it so that it's not just like a polymono conversation, right? Or,
Mhm.
unrequited love across borders. Like it's more
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah, and this question of how do we have love against this backdrop of escalating crises and like almost escalating global crises is really, really, it's a powerful question to ask, and it's a powerful question to contemplate and sit with. It's almost like what is the limit of human resiliency? And
Hmm.
like maybe there is no limit, maybe there is, and is it necessary or a useful project to even name those limitations in some way? I'm curious, like, what stood out to you? I mean, you said, like, there are so many themes in this letter. It almost seems like there are more themes than we can probably get to, like, in this however long chat. But I'm curious, like, what are some salient themes that stood out for you in this letter?
I think for me, there is the desire to meet and all the planning that goes into that, right? Is like
Mhm.
it's a big focus. And I think this letter writer coming from a place of, leaving a long relationship and feeling like they've discovered the need that they have in terms of relating with lovers and romance. Like there's maybe pressure for them to live out the next experiences in a way that feels, that honors that new knowledge that they had. So there's that, and then there's the ways that those expectations can not necessarily overlap with what happens.
Mhm.
So that, like, just on a purely relationship or relational level, I think, like, that desire, that expectation, that pressure, and then the kind of way that that pressure seems to shift things. But then how do you relate this against the pressure of, like, genocide and war, right? Like,
Right.
they met in Beirut. This person's Lebanese. Israel bombing Lebanon is not a new thing, right?
No,
It's
no,
happened
absolutely.
for many, many years, and so this coming up again is like not that this person didn't know, it's like suddenly, this is part of their experience, I imagine, their like firsthand experience if they were living in Lebanon. So there's something not new for that person and a need to get out. So how does that need to like get out and be safe from impending death in relationship to the people you leave behind? And then like following your desire, right? Like
Mhm.
in terms of relationship, like there's like that's like moral guilt stuff I think that could be playing. What about
Yeah,
you?
absolutely. There were a lot of themes that kind of stood out to me. The things that I really connected with were one thing that they said was had a need to understand and finish the narrative of
Yeah.
this whole relationship. And that kind of made me think of the ways that we, like as a species, are seemingly like gravitate towards stories and storytelling.
Mhm.
And I think that the ways in which we do that have obviously shifted quite a lot within the time span of sort of human evolution. But I wonder about this need, and I wonder about the need to narrativize our lives and like how important it is for us to nail in or like dial in how we tell our own stories to ourselves and to other people. And I wonder about that because it seems to me that there's narrative, and narrative is a really important way to sort of experience life and to like sort of filter our lives through like certain stories or storytelling modalities.
Mhm.
But there's also life, and life is vastly more chaotic, vastly more sort of like multifaceted in ways that don't even really make sense. And I don't know if I'm trying too hard to like sew this together, but it's seeming to me that like the need to narrativize this situation might be getting in this person's way a little bit, because there may not be like a distinct beginning, middle, or an end. And for me, in my life, whenever I've tried to sort of fit a mold onto my lived experience, it's created a shit ton of weird feelings and suffering, and it's created this internal dissonance, right? That can be really hard to climb out of in
Yeah.
some way. So I wonder, the reaction that I had to that part of this person's letter was almost I wanted to like reach through the screen and like hold their hands and be like, sometimes life like isn't a narrative and sometimes things just end in a way that is really dissatisfying if you're expecting a kind of narrative arc. And maybe it's very, very possible that I am fixating a little bit too hard on language. That's something I kind of tend to do. But yeah, that was the first point for me that really, really stood out in this letter.
Yeah, I think that's really important that you bring that up. You can even see in the way that this person wrote the letter that they're working to try to make sense of something that they are having a hard time making sense of.
Yeah,
And the way we do that is through narrative, right? And it's like a meaning making process. And there's a question I have really is like, how much can we resist the desire to make meaning out of things? Because
hmm,
the shit that happens to us isn't meaningful until we imbue it with meaning. And often that's retroactive because, when you're hit with something in the present, you're not like, you need that reflection to be like, oh, that was that. And I fit it into a linear narrative and understanding of myself. I think like actual events, as you, I think, are saying, resist that narrativization, they resist the meaning. It's not to say that we can just easily stop our desire to make meaning for things. And we're obviously prompted to that in terms of love and romance. Like we were talking about Dean Spade earlier, like he talks about the
yeah,
romance myth, right? And like how much
mm,
that fucks us up. And actually, he also talks a lot about how willing we are to just like transplant ourselves to other places for relationships. And that
totally.
that can be damaging to our lives.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
I don't it's not a total factor here, they're not trying to, like, live together.
And there's a certain kind of like, as somebody who has most of my relationships in my adult life, romantic or even platonic, have been these kind of long distance connections that are so predicated on a certain kind of or medium of communication, like letters or emails or punk mail or whatever, and it's also predicated on this like certain flavor of longing that
Yeah,
isn't really all, at least for me, like I'll speak totally personally in this chat, generally speaking. For me, like that flavor of longing and that flavor of anticipation is not present in the same way when sort of like geographically located within the same region as a partner or a lover or like a sexual interest or whatever. So that for me is probably like part, I don't know how this person was experiencing that, but I think that given that they were sort of coming out of this very long-term relationship that seems like they were, sharing a lot of resources. They were intimately intertwined within each other's lives. And also, this person was like navigating a realization that they're polyamorous, like within a long-term monogamous relationship, and then getting into this kind of very intense seeming connection with another person that was primarily long distance. Like they met in person, but it's been a primarily long distance relationship for them. So that in and of itself like lends the long distance nature of any sort of relationship can really lend itself to narrativizing also, because you're like having all of these feelings, having all of this longing, having all of this very proscribed or like circumscribed or limited kind of communication with the other person, but you're building something within yourself about them that I could see like contributing to this person's situation also.
yeah, I think that the emphasis on longing is really important. Longing can be uncomfortable to sit within because it's aimed towards a fulfillment that is being deferred. My experience personally is that the longing tends to actually be better than the fulfillment. Like, I don't mean that as a judgment so much of, like, other people, but that the pleasure for me lies more in the anticipation than the actual thing because there's so much energy put into the feeling, the, like, fantasizing about things, right?
Absolutely. And it's the energy of infinite possibility. And when you're with
Mhm.
somebody, the possibility gets bounded and gets like boundaries placed upon it because like while we may be these like beautiful beings whose imaginations are infinite, our realities are bounded by our physical beings, the borders we live in, the money, right? The money that
Yeah,
this person is talking about. Scarcity to resources is recurring theme within this letter, and, like, that hits me so hard, you know?
yeah, and time
Mm,
too, right? You're, like,
right.
limited on time, especially if you're like, "Oh, we're gonna meet for, like, a weekend," then there's all this pressure. Been
Oh my god,
longing for months, and then you go there, and they're like, "Oh, now what do we do?" Right? It's like
for sure.
I always think about that in terms of, like, when people get married, they're, like, married, and then they're in a room together alone after getting married, and they're like, "Oh, now we're married,
Uh-huh,
and, like, now what?" Right? We never get told really that what happens after marriage in the narratives,
'cause
I mean.
the narrative stops there
Yeah,
usually, or, like, in mass media, it kinda stops there, like, that's the end of the story.
because it's not
Um,
interesting.
yeah, it's not interesting. I was also really just to say, like, I feel a lot of compassion for this person. I think that the way that they describe a really complex emotional situation is really, really visceral. It's very, like, viscerally easy to connect with because, like, they're talking about some really real shit in some really, like, accessible and great language. And, like, one of the things that really got me also thematically within this letter is the part where they were talking about this sudden seeming shift in emotional dynamics with, like, their long distance, I guess. I'm not entirely sure what to call them, like, blank lover, maybe? Yeah. Lover is a weird word, maybe
Yeah.
a little bit, but, like, it feels the correct word in this situation, and it made me think about the times when that has happened for me and, like, how confusing that is. Number 1, when you're not in the same space as somebody and you don't have access to their body language or you can't see, like, how they are embodying what they're experiencing, and this very confusing shift between, like, hot and cold, which it kind of seems like that is what this person was experiencing also. And I wonder what you think about, like, when emotional dynamics suddenly take, like, a hard left or like, a downturn or however you wanna say that. I'm still sort of, like, working through my thoughts on it.
Yeah, to have your relationship mediated, especially through text. I think
Mhm,
letters, like handwritten letters are different because there's
mhm.
time and can, like, get sort of a sense of physicality, but text with its immediacy, I mean, for me, I think I've said this before, I have a negative text bias. This was a term I took
Ugh,
from someone where I, like, think that everyone's mad at me when
oh
they
god.
they
Yeah.
text me. And so, I mean, I think texting because, like you said, is absent the body language and the tone of voice, that you can sit there trying to interpret what's being said, and you can go all sorts of directions, and maybe often they're the wrong understanding. So, I mean, it's again a question of like where different people's needs and wants meet and the inability to communicate it. Also, like all the projection that we do in our relationships. But like this situation is also complicated because
Mhm,
the person that they are having these feelings for is going through a pretty intense situation of fleeing basically a country that is under attack and
mhm.
in some kind of temporary situation of trying to find their feet. Right. So, what can you expect from a person in that situation? And when your longing is like really big, can that person even possibly meet that when they have other stuff going on? Not to mention just ever at all, right? Kind of person meet the desires that you have. And I think the writer is aware of this, of course. They're not just like
Mm,
oblivious to it, but maybe there's this dissonance between the longing and desire that this connection has like stoked up and the material reality of what's going on, and those things can't be fully reconciled, right? Like,
mm,
and so there's also just this interference of that which gets translated into this person being like, I can't, this is like too much for me. And it's not like the person was too much, like the letter writer wasn't too much. I don't think the letter writer is even putting too many demands on this person. I think that the lover or whatever who had to move and like find feeding was just like, there's too much going on for me. And the pressure of like showing up in a probably in a way that he wanted to show up, like it didn't feel possible. So
yeah,
I think that becomes a kind of chasm because you can imagine that
yeah,
he even had the same desires and it seemed like that through their previous communication, but this,
yeah,
like, stress and anxiety came up. Now, I mean, he also says he met someone else. Within a poly situation, we don't know what that necessarily means. He said that he didn't want a relationship with this person, but when you add that into a situation of being like, "Actually, this is too much," it definitely raises a question of like, "Oh, are they just being led by a new desire away from something that feels more
yeah.
known?"
Yeah, that makes me sort of think about, and I want to be really careful, or I want to attempt to try and be careful about the way I talk about this because, a number one, I think there's always this kind of like impulse in situations like these to try and get into the head of the person who is exhibiting the confusing or suddenly shifting behavior. And I kind of want to shy away from that to the extent that I can and to the extent that it is like still possible to like have a conversation like this without doing something like that.
Right.
But it's sort of occurring to me, and this is something that I've experienced in my, I don't even fucking know, 2 decades, 2+ decades of being within anarchist scenes and doing sort of mutual aid efforts through COVID and Hurricane Helene. Yeah, I'm in a bioregion that was heavily, heavily impacted by Hurricane Helene back in, what was it, 2024? And it's this sort of observation that I've accumulated over time, which is our relationship to getting needs met, asking for certain things, and also how that interplays with a crisis narrative. So, like, the thing that and I kind of don't want to feel this way, but I sort of do anyway, is that I think that we live in a world that has so heavily deprioritized nuance and has so heavily deprioritized even asking for things when the need is not super, super hyper or pressing. And this is something that I've done in my own like personal relationship, right? Is like, I feel like I need to ask for something and I need to do so couched in this crisis narrative. And I'm not trying to suggest that people are liars or manipulative or anything like that. I think that we are products of the systems in which we live and like the psychological systems and the infrastructure systems and all of those things. And that all of that is not to say that like that certain crises aren't real, because there are crises that are devastatingly real, as in the case of this person's lover. Like they are missing people from their homeland and they're worried about their family. They're having these anxieties, but they're also communicating in this way that is confusing. And it's sort of occurring to me that, like, crisis as a way to, it can be just a really real reason for somebody to drop a connection or to pivot hard. I want to make the point that not everything's a crisis, but I'm also having some doubts about articulating that because I want to respect the person's like proximity to war,
Right.
which is something that I have like never fucking experienced. So I don't want to be disrespectful to like anybody who's in that situation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like an odd way that we have where we feel like we need to communicate needs and like this is the most pressing thing and like this is like a thing that I need really really badly because of this crisis and because of like a politicized reason or like something something something, and I wish that we had like different frameworks in place for intellectually wrangling our needs or like psychologically wrangling our needs in a better way than what we have.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think there's a lot of layers on it. Like on the one hand, living within like a capitalist system, crisis is the kind of motor of the
Mhm.
economy, right? So there's a historical rhythm of crisis, whether it's, economic crisis or the war crisis, right? That like it both keeps us off balance, but also keeps us adherent to these structures through various means of like, dependency and nationalism, like whatever. So we're used to a kind of structure of crisis, but crisis also, going back to narrative, is like a narrative structure. It's like the culmination of a plot that then leads to the denouement or whatever. So I think it's hard for us not to include some kind of crisis within a narrative that we're telling.
Mm.
For the letter writer, there's like a couple places we could locate it. Like they first had this crisis that they seemingly resolved by realizing they needed to get out of the relationship that they were in because it wasn't fulfilling their needs that they were now able to articulate to themselves, and the person that they'd been with wasn't able to fulfill those needs. Right. So there's a crisis there that maybe leads to a feeling of crisis of needing to find something that will fill those needs. And then this person comes about with a strong connection
Mm.
and seems like maybe the person who could, in some way fill those needs. Which I don't know. I've been bracketing this, but it's a question maybe for later, like the identity of polyamory.
Oh
I have
my
some
God,
thoughts
yeah.
about that, like calling it an identity, because I think it's situation specific. And like in one way, I feel like the weight that this person's putting on this, love interest, the long distance love interest, I don't know if it's intense, but it's a strong feeling, right? And then we can't presume to know the other person's experience because they aren't writing the letter. But yes, they're living through a crisis. They've lived through crises in their homeland that has driven them into another place where you could have a crisis of living. But I am gathering from the way that the letter writer reports that this person spoke that I don't know if he was necessarily experiencing it as a crisis, but a feeling of like responsibility or like owing something to
Mm.
this person who had, like, because they had, I think, together set up a meeting. So if you, I don't know, maybe if you hold in hand like an experience of crisis and then feeling pressure and having anxiety, because there's pressure maybe of like showing up, but also anxiety of like, because you've been wanting this, right? And it's happening and like, you have that limited time. So there's all these different kinds of crises that I'm seeing, but I think that they're fundamental to our understanding of like the world. So then when the letter writer tries to unpack it, again, to me, to a certain extent, is getting phrased through an idea of crisis because they're like, well, what
Mm.
does this reveal to me about myself and my desires? Right? Am I a poly person who went for a monogamous person again? All these different questions. And there is a chance that we could tell this story differently by being like, there was this really beautiful, fortuitous meeting. There was a desire for it to continue in some way. There was global events that came in the way. There was an attempt to overcome those to a certain extent, but they like couldn't really be overcome. And so what we end up with is a relationship that had promise, perhaps, but at this point we need to limit to what was experienced. And maybe a lot of that experience was
Yeah.
longing, since it was long distance. And again, I don't feel like we should dismiss the power of longing, in that kind
Totally.
of lesbian longing way, right?
Hell yeah.
Like
I
yearning
mean,
is nice.
yearning is nice and like longing is so part and parcel of like a utopian politic, right? And the
Yeah.
anarchism has like some hallmarks of like a utopian politic, which is like, what will the new world be that we're destroying, or that the old world is sort of destroying itself, but like, what will the new world be? Let's like long for it somehow. And in this like very deeply nerdy way that I just fucking love. But yeah, this idea of like identity too, like the writer, yeah, like you were talking about, this whole situation seems to have created for the writer this crisis of identity in the way of questioning their own polyamorous orientation or, polyamorous aspect of their being. And I guess if the person is listening, I would say probably, yeah, having identity and having like an understanding of yourself is really important, but to try and not bog yourself down into sort of a static understanding of what it means to be XYZ kind of person and allow your relationships to be exactly what they are,
Right.
in some way.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way that I would, like, counter this assumption, like, taking on the idea of polyamory as an identity, like, it's, like, innate within you to be polyamorous, like, I think anyone can be polyamorous, right? And perhaps it
Totally.
is innate in all beings to be polyamorous, and we live in a culture that doesn't support or, give it any kind of value. We're trained into monogamy. But that also doesn't mean that every relationship that you're in needs to be understood within the rubric of polyamory, and that
Yeah.
actually every experience you have kind of creates its own standards in a way. So,
Hmm.
like, if you have this preset notion of what polyamory is and how you have to live it out, and then a relationship doesn't fit into that, then is it a failure of your polyamory, or is it an inability to see what this relationship's possibility is? And
Hmm.
to me, like, a fundamental idea of polyamory that I find interesting more than maybe other ideas is that it would entail an openness to a variety of kinds of relationships that aren't shoehorned into this like one perspective of like monogamous forever coupling. Yeah, that you can see like, oh, this relationship is offering me these things and can fulfill these needs. So I think that's important. And one other way that I would phrase this though is a relationship of desire. So rather than identity, to think about it as desire, polyamory is a way to understand your desires being plural, not singular,
Hmm.
right? That can be attached to different things and attached in different ways, right? It doesn't need to mean everything is the
Hmm.
same in a poly situation. Obviously, like people have different, I don't know, like levels of engagement with different people based on how they want to arrange
Totally.
their lives. So if you relate it to it through desire, I think it frees up a space both for you and the other person. And that's ultimately like for me an important, I don't know, I associate this with anarchism or how I want
Hmm.
anarchism to be is like letting other people off the hook and letting yourself off the hook. And so I don't know if it's just labeling it. Polyamory means an expectation for people to perform a role that actually obscures the desire that's like fueling it. But like, what if you let yourself off the hook? What if you're like, oh, this relationship that kind of blew out in a way that was upsetting and sort of unexpected and
Hmm.
sudden isn't a failure to be polyamorous or whatever, or
Yes.
like a failure to connect with the right person who shares this orientation, but to say like, this is actually part of polyamory. The openness I had to this relationship and the welcoming of whatever it brings, even if it's pain, because all relationships have some aspect of pain. Like
Yeah.
you could reframe it that way to not negate or deny your desire for a poly relationship to the world and
Totally.
the desire for this person who hurt you, but also brought some kind of beauty to your life.
Absolutely. And I think that's so beautifully said. And yeah, I would maybe just add, the only thing I have to add to that is like polyamory seems to me, at least within myself, to be about other people to like a certain extent, like about relationships to other people, but it's also primarily for myself like a relationship with myself and a relationship to how open or closed off or some other adjective I am to my own willingness to be with other people or
Mhm.
whatever. Like be with other people meaning like in the strict sense of the word of like how do I be a person with other people?
Yeah.
And how open are you to having like different kinds of dynamics with others?
Yeah.
And like that needs to be for me like an important facet of like a polyamorous understanding of yourself rather than being like, oh, I'm this sort of like very sort of granular subsection of like polyamorous identities. It's rather like I'm more amorphous because it turns out that people are emotional and complex and multifaceted, and people are like always changing,
Yes.
and that's just how they are. Not ever going to be different.
Yeah, and for me, that's why like the emphasis on yearning and desire is interesting because it's more dynamic than these kind of identity structures. I think as polyamory has had more sort of focus and light shed on it, it's not like mainstream, but there's articles on it in the New York Times and shit, right? And as I've seen like different dating apps kind of orient themselves around polyness,
Mm,
I think it becomes like more rigid in the understanding of it and the expectations of what you should do. And this is true for everything, right? It's like it's relatively or generally true with queer and trans
oh my
experience
God.
too, right? There's the way to do and the way
Yeah.
to be it. If you're like gauging yourself against these ideas, then you're always going to fall short in some way. And I like the way that you're putting it because it's also the thing that I'm interested in. Like poly, I don't use the word poly. There's relationship anarchy. I don't use that word either. But the important lesson I have for these things is to be like, no one relationship is fulfilling all of your needs. That's a myth that we are told. And so
Totally.
you have different needs and desires. And when you meet someone and engage in a relationship with them, you be honest about like what needs and desires are being met there so that you
Mm,
do not project too many expectations on them or expect too much in return, and you can relate it to your other relationships because it's not
mm,
isolated, right? And so you're like, this is a person that when I'm with, these are the things I can expect, these are the feelings that I have, and it has this place within my life. And then there's another relationship that has a totally different place. And then you
mm,
can also be like, well, then this relationship actually I don't want at all. Because when you start like thinking in this kind of loosened way from monogamy and coupling, then you can be like, oh, I don't need to hold on to anyone forever, right? Because we change, and if someone's holding you to account for a past version of yourself, and insisting on that, you
yeah.
you you need to escape. So like thinking about relationships fulfilling all these different needs that would range from romantic and sexual to
Mhm.
friends and other forms of support. So polyamory, I think, emphasizes the kind of like the amorous aspect of it,
Yeah.
but I think I like to extend it to just a different kind of constellation of relationships and how they fulfill you in
Yeah.
various ways.
It's occurring to me too that in the letter, the person is, at the time that they wrote this, was coming out of like a very long-term monogamous relationship.
Yeah.
And even within this sort of like topsy-turvy understanding or like the topsy-turvy process of understanding that you are in fact not a monogamous person, that you're a polyamorous person, there's a fair amount of reflexive reaction that people might carry forward from sort of that long, long, long term emotional landscape of being monogamous. So I would say to the person to like have some grace for yourself or treat all of your emotions in a sort of in this practical kind of phase of their life of like really dialing in and understanding how they function as a polyamorous person. Have some compassion for like kind of the emotional relics of the monogamous, not only like 18 years of experience, but also all of the monogamous sort of like bombardment that we have from like everywhere in society. It's kind of like a death by a thousand cuts of monogamy programming. And sometimes monogamy works for people, and that's great if that's like authentically good for you. I have nothing to say about that. Sometimes polyamory works in a way that's authentically good, and that's great too. But just like have some compassion for yourself to really allow the process to kind of be messy and to not look like any one thing or things.
Right. 18 years is a long time. And
Fuck
there's
yeah.
grief to process there too,
Yeah.
because it didn't seem, I don't know, like unconsciously, but it didn't seem like they went to their partner of 18 years being like, well, I'm poly and we need to break up. They tried to work
Yeah.
something out as a way to maintain it. And maybe it ended up being the way out, but there's a huge loss there. And like 18 years,
Totally.
no matter what, is like not something to overlook in terms of the impact on your life. Like even if it was fucking abusive, right? Like
Totally.
it's a grief to get out of something that has taken up that much of your time. And if it was good and supportive, of course, that's another kind of grief. And, I see this letter writer having guilt around the expectations that they put on
Mhm.
the lover that they wanted to meet and who kind of called it off to privilege or like projecting desires. And maybe there's also remnant guilt from being the one to lead the breakup of their 18-year relationship
Mhm.
because it was their desires that sort of took them out. So I don't know, that's worth kind of questioning. But I mean, again, my suggestion or something to consider is like letting yourself off the hook on this stuff. Like you're in grief for multiple things here. There's a
Yeah.
world of grief. Your lover here is in grief from a loss of a home and a family connections. And there's all these complex dynamics going on that don't necessarily make people act according to what they actually wish, but act according to what they think is possible and what limits they're up against in that moment. But also, that's not to make light of anything. Like, feel the pain and
Mm.
grief of like this thing suddenly ending that you thought had some promise. Like that's real. And even again, if this person wasn't trying to harm them, the letter writer, by saying, I can't do it, right? It was just an honest declaration of where they were at, which
Mhm.
polyamory ostensibly makes room for that. You're still gonna feel hurt and grief, like no matter what the person's intention was or how they tried to present it to you, right? Like it wasn't
Totally.
necessarily like "fuck you, you suck, you're terrible." Like I think that person tried to be honest, and also, as the letter writer recognizes, was in a place of like emotional difficulty. But like, yeah, their understanding of that person's precarity doesn't negate their need to go through the feelings of like pain and grief that they would have from the end of something that was exciting for them. And also, as they narrate it, I understand as being the kind of first big place of
Yeah.
feeling after the 18-year breakup.
And what a like, I don't know anybody who hasn't had that sort of first relationship of either their true gender identity or, within anarchism. It's so easy to, like, put a lot of pressure on that connection, and that doing that is so normal. Like,
Yeah.
doing that is so fucking normal. It's almost it's the rule rather than the exception.
Yeah, that's interesting because then you can see that the letter writer maybe was looking to recognize something about themselves in the way that they were
Yeah.
approaching this relationship. And that's all well and good. But this other person, given the circumstances, was not able to reflect that because of their own situation. And I mean, that is like literally to me the classic impasse of relationships is that like
Mm.
you can't fully see the other person, you project things and desires on them,
Yeah.
and like it's hard to hold together two varying experiences without feeling like one has to dominate the other.
Yeah, and it's so common too for people to confuse their desires with their capacity,
Hmm. Yeah.
and, like, to
So,
overpromise things. I've been on both ends of that, and it
hmm.
sucks either way,
Yeah.
you know, and it sucks for everybody either way.
I mean, it's confusing to. I was thinking about this today for myself, and it's not about polyamory, but it could be related because I'm thinking about the time I am in my life, and I spend a lot of time alone, and
Mm,
I spend a lot of time writing, which is like a real privilege in the position I'm in right now. So, but that isolates me even further, and I'm like, I live in New York, and I'm like, there's so much going on. I have friends. There's so many things to do. Why don't I do more? Why am I not more social? Why am I not at like every cool thing that's happening? And then I have to
mm,
be like, well, when I know about things, like sometimes I go and sometimes I'm like, I don't want to go, right? I don't have the capacity for that. I don't actually want to. Like, it sounds cool. I don't want to. I like the work that I'm doing. I like writing.
mm,
And so then I have to shift like what are my values right now? Like if I try to gauge myself by the values that I had when I was like 20 versus now in my 40s, I'm in a different place, right? And so like my most important thing isn't to like party. I don't actually want to party.
yeah, yeah,
But there's that pull of like this is what's meaningful and important. And Why am I bringing that up? I think like it's similar, right? Especially when you're opening up a new desire or ability to live a desire is like, how do you actually evaluate what you're doing? Is it from some external expectation or a projected expectation that doesn't actually match what you want? And then when it's in a relationship, it has to have both or multiple sides, like meeting in some place that, you know,
Totally.
is shared.
I so heavily resonate with what you said about sort of the patterns of your life changing. And I really, in my own life, I'm also in my 40s, and I've had to sort of renegotiate my own relationship to saying no to things. Because in some like really kind of deep recess of myself, I thought authentically that being out and being with people means I was winning. Like it
Yeah. Yeah.
meant I'm like succeeding at life. It means that you're doing the right thing. And being at home and being alone or working on solo projects or not dating anyone means that you're losing in some fundamental way. And that's just a really fucking harsh dichotomy
Hmm.
to reckon with. So, like, it's now kind of just occurring to me that I'm like definitely in the process of renegotiating my own relationship to saying no to things. And in sort of a consent based way, if you're thinking about like consent as being also like polyamory, a relationship that you have with yourself, if you
Yeah.
only ever say yes, it means that the consent is broken. If you can't say no to something, then the consent is not working.
Yeah.
Or if you feel weird or bad about saying no, or you feel like, oh, it means I'm losing, or it means that I'm being a bad anarchist or a bad friend or a bad partner or whatever, it means I'm all these things. So, like, that shit runs real deep too.
I mean, that's literally where I developed this idea of like the breakup theory is like,
Fuck yeah.
I was like, I think I wrote about this being like, when I started hanging out with more and more anarchists, I felt more empowered to say no and
Mm,
be understood. Now, it didn't mean that I actually said no to everything, but I felt like anarchists more than other people I'd hung out with, or, obviously people that you like work with, could hear no and not think it personally like, oh, you're just saying what your limitations are. It's also, I think, true within disabled community too,
mm,
which is
mhm.
also a world that I am part of. But like, yeah, that you are able to say no and it's okay. And no one's like shaming you, like, come out, it's gonna be so good. Or like, you know what I mean? Like, and you don't have to have the FOMO because also, I mean, in my 40s, I'm like, I go to things, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've been going to punk shows for like 30 years now. Like, do I need to go to another punk show? I don't know. I'm always there. I'm like, I should be at a punk show. And I go to the punk show, I'm like, yeah. Yeah, I've seen
Yep.
this like 1,000 times at this point,
Seriously.
But yeah,
If you've been elbowed in the ribs one time, you've been elbowed in the ribs 1,200 times.
I don't seek it out anymore. But yeah, I think that's an important thing to be able to say no, to be able to refuse, not necessarily refuse in like a violent or angry way, but just to be like, this is where I'm at and this is what I need. And it's not shameful. I have a lot of
Mm,
shame about it sometimes. To like be alone is somehow shameful.
mm,
And then it also does seem sometimes to come into tension with like this anarchist idea of like community and connection and
totally.
mutuality. I'm like, well, if am I isolating myself too much? Am I too
Mhm.
comfortable being alone? Am I too much wanting to like sit and write and whatever? That I still haven't figured that part out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anarchism exists within the world. Like, it's so influenced by things that are within society. Like, it's not apart from society, even though, however much we sort of long for or are attempting to build different societies and different ways of doing things. And I feel like anarchists get a lot of things right and a lot of things wrong. And welcome to the fucking world of being human,
Yeah.
in a way. So, like, I think that there are subtle pressures within anarchism to conform to like a sort of different kind of hegemony, and there are like overt pressures to conform to different sorts of hegemonies within non-anarchist societies and non-anarchist spaces. And like anarchists just like aren't immune from that. And especially anybody who's like within queer and trans spaces too. There are so many different queer and trans hegemonies that we have to,
Yeah.
hegemonies meaning like, if I'm using this word correctly, like the accepted, normal, in scare quotes, way of being that we navigate sort of constantly. And there's always these questions of like, am I XYZ enough to be part of this space? Yeah. So those things are really real and like definitely are probably going to be part of our scenes if the revolution happens tomorrow and capitalism falls and we're all great and everything's good. These are things we're going to have to navigate for forever. So like
Yeah.
that's just a thing.
Yeah, it takes a while to reform social relations in a way that like isn't going to produce these things.
Totally.
Because like we are operating on the scarcity mentality that I think means that we try to, judge who's in and out because there's only so much that can go around. I mean, with trans
Mm,
community, it's like very explicit and understandable, right? When it's like access to hormones and surgery is very limited
mm,
and getting worse. And so
yep.
that like needs to be protected. And then people start gatekeeping who's trans or not without really thinking about how long it might take to get to hormones, like
Yeah,
and maybe not even thinking about their own experience of how they got to hormones, once they've had it. So we're veering off a little, though I think this is pertinent, but maybe just to get back before, because we've been talking for a while and like maybe some like last things about this, because I want
absolutely.
to do justice or whatever, honor this letter in ways. And I don't want to come off like we're just being critical, or I don't know if that's how we've come off, but I just like don't. I want to like maybe end with some honoring of what they're going through.
Yeah. I would love to say something along those lines if that's okay.
Yeah.
They close the letter by talking about this notion that their own privilege means that they have no right to feel what they're feeling.
Mhm.
And I really hope in the intervening months that they don't feel that way anymore because I think that like privilege is a thing for me at least in my understanding of it. It means sort of a position in society or in spaces whereby you just don't have to think about certain structural inequalities. So, like, the classic example is of like cishet men not even crossing their minds thinking that some people might feel unsafe walking on a street at night. Like that to me is a classic understanding of privilege. But I hope that like whatever privilege spectrum this person is occupying, whatever sort of like constellation of things they're dealing with as a human on a day-to-day basis, I really hope that they are like allowing themselves to feel whatever they're feeling and to understand that like whether or not it's like okay for you to feel a certain way, you're gonna feel that way anyway. So I think it's not only okay to feel certain things, it's just inevitable that you're gonna do so because you're a human being,
Yeah.
you know?
You can feel all kinds of contradictory feelings too, right? Like,
Totally.
and that's part of being easy on yourself because you can't expect your brain and heart and unconscious to only produce like, you know,
Totally.
pious anarchist fucking ideas.
Yeah.
And you can be like, oh, I have a position of relative privilege to this person. And I also feel very hurt and upset. And I can understand that this person wasn't trying to do that and was pressed by their circumstances. And yet my feelings are valid, right? Those things can
Yeah.
all coexist. And like, I think from this letter that this person is very aware of what their lover's been going through, right? They're not like just like, oh, he just didn't show up, right? Like it's like
Mhm.
they've experienced and helped people going through similar situations, as they said. They're very understanding and seem to be supportive. And the situation that they created or tried to create was one that was taking pressure off him in order to make that possible
Totally.
based on a shared desire to make it possible when they were making these choices. And then at the end, they say, I don't want like a lack of resources to get in the way. So to whatever extent they have privilege, that relationship to resources, it shows a willingness to act outside of the kind of expected standards of privilege. And it's not like, oh, I'm rich and I can just do whatever the fuck I want. It's like,
Right.
I am going to do what I want with what I have without feeling that there's a right way to do these things. And it's going to
Mm.
enable the life that I want to live in this moment, because we can't even be sure of any other moment, especially when you're like in this fucking situation of warfare. So you may feel guilty that they had more resources, but that's not really something worth feeling, especially when you're using your resources to create a situation that you're inviting someone else into.
Right.
You, the letter writer, were doing really beautiful things and trying to make space for something that you felt to be beautiful and had desire for. And it's true that it's sad that you weren't able to be met there, and that what you had expected because of based on previous experience with this person just was not able to happen in that moment.
Yeah.
But it's not because of your privilege. It's not something that you like did or overlooked. It's seems really clear to me from the outside that this had most to do with his exile.
Totally. Totally.
Even if he said, "Oh, I met someone else I'm interested in," I don't think that that is the same kind of weight as like this. He's like living on a couch or whatever. I don't know. Like you have
Yeah.
lower capacity when your life is precarious.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's making me think of like I wish that we had a different, or I don't know, wish we had is so passive. I almost want us to have a different framework for talking about privilege than the one that we exist in. Because, like, sometimes I feel like that word is a little bit overused and a little bit used in ways that aren't totally in the spirit of the word. And to be clear, I think it's still a useful framework and still a useful word to use where acceptable, but, like, I almost wish there was a different framework, and here's me being, like, fixated on language again, which is a hallmark of my personality. But the
Yeah,
other thing that I wanted to say, I don't remember, Shuli, do you remember if they used the word closure in this letter?
I'm gonna
I
just
don't
take a glance. They said, "I'm frustrated with my need to understand and finish the narrative."
I think that the thing I don't know that I would say to this person in that regard is that if this is a need that persists, you can absolutely meet it in a lot of different ways. Like, there are some ways that you can meet this need that are contingent on contact with this person, if that is still possible. Hopefully, it is. There are also ways you can meet this need to, like, close a loop or close the narrative with your community or with other friends, and only you really know what will make this feel meaningful and what will help this happen. Like, you know yourself better than anybody else does. If this is still a need that persists, like, months or weeks or years down the line, you can absolutely meet it. It's not a wrong thing to want. It's absolutely okay to, like, want this,
Yeah, I mean, to return to
you
the
know?
narrative thing, I want to know how we can resist the impulse to make meaning out of everything. But I think the corollary of that is that we are then free to make meaning how we want, rather than
Yeah.
to try to fit into a narrative. And so, your desire for closure or whatever, an ending to the narrative, is you
Mhm.
can dictate what that means. And when
Mm.
you put that on the other person, you really can't expect someone to serve the closure to you. Right?
Yeah.
Even if it's like, what is it? Conscious uncoupling or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to provide something for yourself, and you should get support, as you're saying, doing it, but ultimately, it's in your hands to say what it meant and what it means and how you're gonna use it for the
Yeah.
future. I like to pair this idea of, like, refusing the demand for meaning to open up the possibility of feelings of meaning that,
Mm.
you can live through and that can contradict each other, and you can hold on to one if you want, and it can
I
change.
love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I think that's, for me, like, as good a place to any to close the conversation. Do you wanna say anything else about this letter?
I mean, I could probably go on about stuff, but I think that is probably good. I hope we did justice to what they wanted and, to take in the personal and political ramifications. And I just like hope that because it's been a little while since I've been able to respond to this letter. And so I just hope that they found some kind of peace and maybe that they're living the poly life that they've been wanting. Maybe this was like a catalyst to figure out how they wanted to engage that. And I hope that they aren't feeling like super guilty about it.
Yeah. I really couldn't have said it better. I feel like I learned some things about you. I, like, worked through some things verbally myself,
Yeah.
which is something I always love about talking with you is, like, just this sense that it feels like a very, like, safe and intellectually challenging in a good way space to work through, like, weird, hard shit, you know? So I really appreciate that about you.
Yeah, well, thanks for showing up and doing that with me. That's what I want to do here is like, because I'm not a fucking expert, but I'm willing to go in all the weird places and think through all the possibilities. And I try to make a space where we can do it together honestly and raw and, without expectations. And that also means like, shit that I say is wrong doesn't apply to the letter writer, but the sharing the vulnerability that we can do, you and me together in this is hopefully helpful.
Totally. Yeah, I hope that if the person is listening that they got something out of this. I definitely got something out of reading their letter, so I just wanna, I guess, personally close with that is, like, their words were so valuable, and I'm so happy they reached out, and I also hope they're living the life of their dreams.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This was like initially a head scratcher for me, but talking it through, I feel like I got a better understanding and hopefully was helpful for the person. And I will welcome you if you listen to this to write back through the form, leave a message, any kind of feedback or update you want to give. People have done that before. We've done 2 letters with people because there's more to say. So I welcome you to respond, whether that's for me to share or just for our conversation. I'm happy to hear from you.
That's awesome.
All right. Anything else that Amr do you want to talk about or say?
The only thing I have to plug is the Final Straw radio show, which I think we've done. You can find it on all socials and at the finalstrawradio.noblog.org.
Yeah, I wouldn't be here without the final straw. I was given my chance to blab on a microphone and get to talk to the people I admire the most.
That's what we got.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
That's it.
You've been listening to The Breakup Theory. Rate and follow us and tell your friends to break up.